Well, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here today, and you know, the opportunity to present is an honor for sure, and really looking forward to taking in all the other amazing presenters we have over the next week or so. This time has been obviously so interesting for all of us, and the way that we've had this opportunity to connect across the country and around the world through basketball has been truly welcomed by me, certainly during this time. So again, just excited to be here today. As I was picking a topic, I was going through a couple different things, and things that impacted our Ryerson Rams season in a really positive way this past year in particular. So I landed on reinforcing culture in practice. It's something that we've really worked hard at being deliberate at in the last few seasons, and believe it was a key component to our success this past season in particular. So today I'll share some ideas and concepts of how at Ryerson we do reinforce culture. So I'll just share my screen here, presentation. I think we're all good there.
Yeah, that's good.
So I guess before I get started, one of the big things is that, I think few, if any, of these ideas are truly my own. I've been really, really fortunate to learn from some of the best coaches, educators, mental performance coaches, athletic therapists, the list goes on, from around the world and certainly from across the country, and just have taken bits and pieces from lots of different experiences that I've had and connections that I've had, and tried to apply them how I think they best fit with our Ryerson program. And I just think that is one of the most important pieces first. Hopefully you'll get some things here today that you can take away and apply. I don't think what I share with you can take and it's a perfect blueprint for you, but hopefully there's some bits and pieces that will work for you in your program. So first thing, this is a quote I heard earlier this season, probably in the fall, I think, because it was college football season. This is from Dabo Sweeney, who's the head coach of Clemson football. And I think it was from a pregame huddle or speech with his team. He said, "They can prepare for what we do, but they can't prepare for who we are." And that quote really resonated with me because I know over the years, I've certainly become consumed with our X's and O's and executing, and that's certainly a very, very important part to your team's success. But oftentimes that overtook some of the culture pieces and became more important, or the thing that I focused on, instead of really focusing on who we were as a team. So that's where the culture piece comes in for me. For us, culture is really what your team identifies and buys into. So like your core values, your standards of behavior, it can be your style of play, and then further it can be your team identity or even your player's identity. So those are the different layers that we'll look at a little bit today.
Hey, Coach, I'll just jump in. So all we're seeing in your PowerPoint is your main screen. We haven't seen the start of we can't see each slide.
Great. That's good to know. That's a problem.
Someone caught it in the chat. I can't take credit for it. So
nice. Hold on. Let me see if I can fix that.
So if you can just start the presentation, that should help.
Do we have it? Oh, no.
See the layout here. Yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing some of the messaging here. I just got to solve it.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so you're on slide 2 right now.
Yep. And when I go to presentation mode, what do we have? Nope.
No.
Oh, hold on. Let's see. I think I got it now. How about now?
Yep, looks great.
Great. Okay, so here's the Dabo quote that I was talking about. So like I was saying, culture values, standards, style of play, team identity. For us, those are all pieces of our culture and things that we try and emphasize and bring to practice in addition to the technical and tactical pieces. And I think the big thing is like culture is important, again, beyond the X's and O's, because I believe that it provides a larger purpose to the team and the individuals. It keeps players engaged, actively engaged, I think passionately engaged, and inspires and motivates. I think going throughout the course of the season, things can be up and down, wins and losses, different things can, impact motivation. So this higher purpose, the culture, the values, the standards can help drive that when other things out of your control perhaps aren't going as well. So like most teams, we start our season with off-court meetings, and we'll create and review our standards, our values, and work together to decide what our values and standards are going to be for that season. We've had pretty regular, not drastically shifting standards and values over the last number of seasons. Perhaps that's because we had consistent type of people and similar values amongst our people, or we just believe that these are the ones that are working, but we're also not afraid to change them. And for us, and for me in particular, it's become really important to recognize what my values and personal standards are, because I think early on as a coach, I would, again, take things away from other coaches that I've watched and see that some of their values were leading to success, and I would try to apply them, but they weren't the right fit for me and who I was as a coach. So I think it's first off really important to build some awareness and understanding of what your values and standards are, and not to say that something's important if you never emphasize it, talk about it, or spend time on it, or live those values yourself. So as a coach, I think your program must be driven by what you believe in. And then you have to connect your why as well. So why are your standards and values important to your team's success? I think there's some things that will build behavior and attitudes of your program that may not directly contribute to wins on the court, but I think building the solid foundation of behaviors and attitudes and so on will ultimately impact success, and then others will have more direct impact on your play and your performance on the floor.
Hey, Coach, I'm just going to jump in again. I think there's some people saying that they have a black screen on your presentation again.
Great. Can you see it?
I see. Yeah, I saw a slide there.
Okay.
So we're just some technical difficulties here.
I just stopped sharing. I'm going to reshare it.
Yeah, try it again here. Okay, so I see your main screen. So if you can start your presentation.
Same thing. Yep. Keeps flipping back and forth here.
Okay, so I see your diagram with the blue arrow connecting the two pictures.
Great. That's the right one.
Okay, I think we're back. If we're not, just let us know in the chat, but it looks like we might have fixed it. So.
Okay.
Thanks.
Keep me updated. Great. So big thing is, again, we spend some time in the classroom working on our values and our standards. But then ultimately we need to do some work to bring those values from the classroom to the court. So they're not just slogans or signs in our locker room. Although I think those things have great value, I think the more that you can demonstrate how your values and standards move their way onto the floor, the better, or the bigger impact they're going to have on your program. So traditionally, I guess, again, the last 5 or 6 years, these have been our core values: pride and passion, accountability, commitment, toughness, and togetherness. Again, all values that have really resonated with me. And I think at the base of things, these really dictate behavior and help decipher, I guess, ultimately the difference between right and wrong and what we believe to be right and wrong. So pride and passion for us, just representing something bigger than ourselves. We're big on ownership and responsibility through accountability. One of our team mantras is really about commitment, but being the best at getting better. And that's our focus every single day. And then toughness, togetherness, I think are pretty much self-explanatory. But this season, so these are our core values. They exist still. This season, we took a bit of a shift, and we still kept those other core values, but we started to change our language a little bit. One, in recognizing how much we use certain words, and two, in how much we emphasize certain things, and then three, in recognizing the importance of these things and the connection to ourselves and our beliefs and how our team best functioned. So pretty unique to this season for us, but something we'll maintain moving forward, is we've spent a significant amount of time on psychological safety. So Google did some research on team effectiveness, and many of you may have seen some of that research. Would encourage you to look it up if you haven't. And they basically found 5 key things that impact team effectiveness. They are psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, and impact. And psychological safety was found to be the most important thing. So the definition of psychological safety is a situation in which everyone is safe to take risks, voice their opinions, and ask judgment-free questions. So this is the type of environment that really resonated with us and that we really wanted to work to create. So again, we spent some time in the classroom on psychological safety, but then also spent some time on bringing this to the court to create an environment where our team was working on better connections, better communications, elevating our level of competition, elevating our level of accountability, and then ultimately also bringing just great joy to what we do. For me, that's just a founding thing in coaching. I love going to practice every day with our players, and we wanted to make sure we have fun and create an environment that people want to be in every single day. And we really work to enjoy the journey and celebrate all of our processes along the way. So moving from values to standards for us, and I guess the biggest difference is that these become a little bit more specific in the behaviors that we want our athletes to bring every single day. So fairly straightforward for us. We keep the list pretty short. I think there are other standards, but these are the real key ones for us. The first one is being on time. So we respect our schedule and our time together. The second one is coming prepared, bringing what you need to be at your best. So for us, that's showing up with your gear that you need, your water bottle. Sounds simple, but I think we all know that players forget these things sometimes. We've got being present, which is minimizing distractions in your team environment. Specific one for us is no cell phones in our team environment. So every season we'll talk about what those look like. Having a presence, and this is where the connection and the communicating with others comes in, and staying resilient. So maintaining positive body language is something that I recognized really irritates me. So this is a newer one on the list, because I recognize that I get frustrated when players hang their head or they feel bad for themselves when they make a mistake. So rather than just allowing myself to get frustrated every time this happened, we've added it as a standard in order to try and work on creating the right behavior before I get frustrated, essentially. And I think the big thing about these standards is obviously there's a lot of behaviors associated here. But the other side of it, it's a lot around mental performance, which is a big part of what I believe in leads to success. So essentially not just bringing culture to the court and reinforcing that, we're also reinforcing our mental skills in practice, which for us is a big part of the culture that we are creating. And again, these were our standards from this season, but ultimately these items can adapt and change over time. They never set in stone. As I said, I've added one this season. And some require a lot of work and emphasis, and some just kind of happen depending on your team that year, or maybe over a number of years. And you might need to spend more time on some things than other year to year based on your team, your players, and the strengths that they all have. So thinking about deliberate ways to reinforce culture, the first one for us is using our language. So I think every team has language, specifically to spots on the floor, or what they call their positions on defense and offense. Whatever keywords they might have, you use them every day. We've spent a lot of time on creating and clarifying our language with our staff so that we're consistent in delivery to our players. And so this is our basketball language, but this is also using all the words that I just showed you. So, going back to these standards, we'll use the word connect, communicate, compete, be accountable all the time, to try and make them extra familiar, and really get them to resonate with our athletes. Second thing for us is leading by example. I'm a big believer that if our value is going to be on time, that I better be on time. So our expectation is that our staff, first and foremost, models the behaviors that we expect, and we'll show how this transfers to practice for us in a couple ways. Showing appreciation has been one of the best ways that we've, I think, improved our culture this season. And for us, that's a little bit of, just seeking people out one-on-one, a little quiet, like, hey, I heard you communicate to so-and-so that last possession. I think those little one-on-one recognitions and appreciations with players can go a long way. We've created some traditions to help build our values on the floor. And then we celebrate values through action. So the simple one with that might be playing time, but there can be other areas that can show through, by just recognizing, players and their roles for doing things that align with our values. So, again, accountability, it might be just challenging, or competition might be challenging a player in practice. Celebrating and spotlighting those actions are a great way to reinforce culture. So I've kind of touched on the practice environment, and that we spend a lot of time on creating an optimal practice environment, or what we believe to be an optimal practice environment. So what that looks like for us, is our setup. First and foremost, we have a score clock in practice every day. We have a whiteboard. I'll show you how we use that in a little bit. We've got our equipment out and ready to go, and we've got music in practice every day. So these are all little things that impact us as a staff coming prepared, creating an environment that is prepared for the athletes to come into, so that matches our standards of excellence. The music always adds a little bit of joy as well. And I'll show a couple clips of how that impacts our environment in a little bit. The next part of our practice environment is in practice responsibilities. So we've got an incredible coaching staff at Ryerson. I think hopefully some of them are listening today. They deserve a shout out because they help make our environment spectacular, assisting with the preparation, but then just aligning with our values and taking on their role in an incredible way in practice. So every coach in practice has an area that they're in charge of, what they're responsible for watching, maybe tracking, providing feedback on. So we ensure that our staff is ready to go. They know what they're watching in each drill, and they're providing focused feedback. We're really fortunate to have some amazing student managers who assist with the preparation, the score clock, different things like that. One of the big things in practice for us is be on time. I talked about that standard. We work really hard to stay on time. So we'll start practice on time, majority of the time, maybe 1 or 2 minutes late. And we work really hard to try and stay on time in practice. I think most coaches struggle with that. I certainly do, and I've worked hard in my planning to be better with that. But also try and respect our players' time and be finished on time as well. So again, that's us as a staff leading by example. So the managers are great with that. We've got a clock on every drill. We've got a shot clock on every drill. Again, all things detailed and really prepared. And then our athletic therapists and injured players are often involved in practice. I mean, if they're injured but not so injured that they can be doing something on the sideline, then they're active that way. But otherwise, they might be tracking something. They might be watching something. We talked about our psychological safety value a little bit earlier. We want everybody to feel included and part of our process. So, they've got the runway to provide feedback and be engaged with the team, even if they're not able to be in a drill. And then the last part is the learning environment. And again, through national team experiences and exposure, I've had a lot of opportunities to learn about an optimal learning environment. And there's been a lot of research on that lately. And this has probably been the biggest shift, both for me and our environment this year. First, in just, again, clearly outlining our standards and making sure we live them and talk about them every single day. Creating a clear language like we've talked about, so there's consistency with that. And then structuring a practice. Our practices typically every day are emphasizing competition, communication, connection, and that's built throughout our entire practice. But then we're incorporating opportunities to solve problems and for the athletes to solve the problems, opportunities for the athletes to ask questions rather than us as coaches just telling all the time. There's still lots of moments where telling and teaching needs to happen, but part of creating accountability, part of creating problem solving for the players in big moments in the games is teaching them to communicate to each other. So we've worked really hard to try and facilitate those things in practice. For me, it's been really hard because things are less controlled, more chaotic. Sometimes you're not sure what's actually transferring and doesn't look as pretty in the moment, but I think we've seen that turn into cooperation and communication in key moments on the floor. And I think that's really made us better. As uncomfortable as it made me, I became more comfortable with it as the season went on. So for us, practice structure takes the same form every day. And as I mentioned from the Google team effectiveness research, structure and clarity is one of the key pieces to team effectiveness. So our practices look very, very similar every single day, both in flow of how they're planned, but in how we start, how we finish, how we warm up. There's certain elements that are consistent every single day. So the first one is we start practice by locking it up, which this photo shows in the background. This in particular, I think I got this from Pat Summit, who used to do this with her Tennessee teams, is they would start practice with everybody's feet touching. So everybody's automatically connected. These are the moments where we review our objectives for the day, talk about what we're trying to accomplish for the day. And it automatically creates, a standard of being present. Sometimes, certainly in university, players are coming from class, they're coming from different things. There's lots of distractions. It's easy to, allow those things to come into practice. So by locking it up like this, you're forced to physically connect with your teammates. You're looking across at somebody, you're going to make eye contact. So there's automatically an engagement piece that then gets fostered through the next part of practice. But we found this just has become a tradition for us. It's how we start, it's how we finish. And, if we have a visitor in practice, they come into our circle and join us this way. So it's just become part of who we are. The second thing we do is we always got to have a warm-up that has some level of communication. We spend some time on a mental piece or a team piece. So I talked about all of the standards. They'll almost always find our way into warm-up. Again, we're really fortunate to have some incredible staff who facilitate some world-class warm-ups for us. Again, a lot of this comes from national team, and our athletic therapist with the national team, Danielle Dobney, is the best I've ever seen, and she helps us at Ryerson. So we've, have some of her, she runs warm up for us, but then we steal and add her ideas when she's not there. So again, I'll show a couple examples of that, but we will build in, developing problem solving skills into our warm up, focus, accountability, confidence, resilience, connection, cohesion, composure, consistency. We'll have any of those themes in practice on any given day based on what we feel is important, maybe related to how close we are to competition or something we observed in the last competition. So again, those mental skills or potentially those team standards we want to work on, find their way into warm up, and then we'll find ways to integrate it through the rest of practice. Danielle's role is super unique with us. She's purely there to provide feedback on our standards. So she has the right during practice. She'll run our warm-up, but during practice, she has the freedom to stop a drill based on any of the standards or behaviors that I've already gone over. So we might be focusing on something technical, tactical, but she is, she might stop it and say, hey, how's our communication? Or she's giving feedback to our players that way. And it's just brought a whole nother level of reinforcing our culture to practice. We always have a compete element. That was a critical piece to our growth this season. I'll talk about how we did that. And then obviously the technical, tactical, but we really work to fit all of these other things in around the technical, tactical piece that we have every single day. So here's just a quick example. I'm hoping we can all see this okay. I haven't pressed play yet, of a warm-up that we've done in practice. So this is actually a volleyball game. The key pieces to this is that there's really direct communication. So it was a little bit less about what they're doing here and a little bit more that there was a specific order that the team had to follow when they were doing this drill. So they had to communicate and they had to focus, and you can see they just end up having so much fun with it. We love to incorporate other sports into our practice, mostly because it forces our players to take some risks. So that psychological safety is challenged a little bit because different players are often not good at certain sports. The other thing that comes out of this one in particular, the whole team's working together. I'll just play it again. The whole team's working together, but they also are working to get to a certain number. So even though they're working together, they're still competing to try and get to a certain level. So immediately in warm up, we're building in a compete element. Sometimes we'll have them in two teams and there's an accountability piece. But there's almost always a compete piece to go along with it, whatever that mental or culture piece is. Here's a couple shots of our whiteboards in practice. So not always the neatest by any means, but we visually track wins, we visually track our one-on-one ladder, and we visually track our shooting scores from practice every day. So not all of those things are done every single day, but earlier in the year, almost every day, all of them were done. Wins get tracked, and I'll show you how they get counted after this, but we found that this has had a great impact on raising our level of compete in practice. So through this, players know how they're doing that day. Are they winning? Are they losing? And it really creates a level of, resilience potentially if you're having a bad day in practice, or confidence. But it just, visually teams are aware. I think a lot of players know, but when they see it up there that they haven't won a game that day, that can be impactful. We do a one-on-one ladder where, again, it's just a competitive scenario where there's a winner every single day, and players know who it is, and that creates some competition to want to be at the top. And then we've got a number of shooting drills where we'll just visually track a score, and I'll show a little bit more of what that looks like for us in a second. But basically, again, players are competing against each other for their score, or they are competing against themselves because they know what their best score is. So here's a look of just, over the course of a couple weeks of tracking our one-on-one ladder. So again, we bring it every day, we put it on the board, and players walk into practice and are reminded where they are on the ladder, and oftentimes they're already scouting their matchup for that day, and talking about it before practice starts. So that had a really positive impact on our compete in practice. Here's our win tracker. So this shows, visually just how many players are winning, or which players are winning what percentage of their games in practice every week. So a couple times throughout the season, we might post this in the team room, but we've found more than anything that the visual reminder on the whiteboard every day is more than enough for a compete. So this became a little bit more for just us as a team. We had conversations as a staff of whether, the players with the most wins or the players at the top of the one-on-one ladder should be the ones that start. How do we reward those things? I think, the way the wins played out in a lot of ways, it kind of matched who we thought should be starting anyway. So it was good to have that reinforcement. But again, just a visual to know like how our competition is going. And then our shooting cauldron, we've got 5 or 6 drills that our players know that take 5 or 6 minutes in practice. So really quickly in between 2 competitive drills, we might say, okay, we're in 2 and out right now. And this shooting is typically a little bit more block than random, but it is competitive. So it adds some pressure to our players. They're on a time constraint. Typically they know what their best score is, and they know what someone else's best score is. So they're trying to make a number of shots in a short amount of time. And again, this will be posted in our team room from time to time. But more often than not, the drills just become familiar, and they know roughly what their best score is, and they're trying to beat it. So they're competing with themselves as well as their own teammates. Okay, so I've got a few clips here from our practice just to show some examples of some of the things that I've talked about. So this is just the start of practice here where we lock it up. We're reviewing what we're going to do for the day. Every day always starts and ends like that. Here's another look at a warm-up drill. This time we've got a skill going with communication. But you just get a sense of the music in the background and a little bit of the environment that it creates. Hopefully the volume's okay here. So there's just an energy and fun happening here. And then we move on to something that's a little bit more communication and focus based. So again, this is another random warm-up, not really that basketball specific. This time we've got 2 teams, so one over here, one over here. They're competing against each other, and there's specific instructions. So again, usually our warm-ups are competing in some way. They've got to get to a certain number, but it tends to become less about the actual execution of the skill and more about the execution of the communication or the focus. So if a line is not touched or a name is not on a pass, and we found different ways to amplify the challenge associated with some of those things, then it starts at the beginning of the year with the coaches putting a team back to 0. But what we started to do midway through the season is one team would go, the other team would watch, or we'd have as many as 4 teams, and the players had to build the skill of saying, nope, no name, wasn't loud enough. pass was off target, didn't touch the line. So we taught how to hold each other accountable through those types of things. So our accountability value wasn't just something that we talked about in the classroom. We actually built drills to practice giving that feedback into our warm-up. So then when things got competitive later in practice, hopefully some of those skills would begin to transfer. We could hold each other accountable, and we could, get accomplished what we needed to get accomplished. So again, here's just a look at the warm-up happening. Clearly a communication emphasis in this one. Someone messes up here in a second. So this got stopped, and the team got challenged a little bit. And here's just another glimpse at something else that will happen rather than, again, a lot of telling from the coach. This instance, it's a challenge from the coach or a question, and I think the team just comes together for a bit of a huddle to strategize to go into the next level of competition. And sometimes within that, we'll assign different voices. It might be the injured player's job to make sure that communication happens, or to pass along a specific message. Again, just practicing the communication and accountability skills amongst the different players.
Hey, Coach, I had a question about someone asking if you could please explain that last drill and just explain what they were looking at.
The warm-up one? Yeah. So I think it was really simple. The ball had to bounce once before it could be hit back, and only once, and it had to go over the center line. So I think this was like our third or fourth practice of the season, actually. So it was super basic. And the only thing I think they had to do, other than the one bounce, which was a focus piece, they had to get behind the volleyball line. So they had to go to the other end. And then everybody had to count the number every time. So if there was a point when, the level of communication wasn't good enough, they would go back to 0. Or if the ball went out of control or someone touched it early or late, they would go back to 0.
Good. Thanks for that.
Yep, no problem. Okay, this is just like a small moment in practice, but I enjoyed it because there was a little controversy over whose ball it was. And again, early in the season, we just let them have this out because we liked that it created some conversation and challenge amongst players. I think, with women sometimes or girls, they won't always challenge. They might say, oh, like, you have it, or they don't voice their opinion. So in this instance, there was just a challenge for whose ball it was. And they just end up solving it. So that didn't take that long, but we just let it happen in order for them to solve the problem on the fly. And it's obviously, I think there's times when us as coaches might step in there, depending on how the drill's going or whatnot. But I think those are good moments for the players to take on. Last couple of things here, just to glimpses into our practice. We've got our one-on-one ladder over here on the whiteboard. So this is just the players self-organizing. They know what's going on. They know what's expected. As I mentioned, some of them have already sought out their first matchup of the day based on the ladder that was on the board. And they get right to a basket. They know how the scoring system works, and they start competing. And then, game ends, they go back to the board, they find a new matchup, and it continues on. So again, the self-organization, player-led. And then I think we've got 2 more things here. Again, we're just going into a 5-minute game. quick instruction happening from us as coaches, and then the players are self-organizing about their game plan and what they want to see happen. So there might be instructions for, again, different players to be the lead, but building communication, feedback skills, and so on. And our last clip here is just for us, how we reinforce culture. This reaction by this assistant coach is specific to a technical item, but I think these things are so important where we're just showing appreciation for whatever it is. Again, this is a specific technical item for us, but he just visibly gets excited. If the volume was up, you could hear him. He just, we executed the tactic we wanted to execute there. You might be talking about that one later in your presentation, Dave. Moving on here, the last thing that I'll talk about briefly is just our team identity. So we went from values to our standards. And the thing that we spent more time than ever on this season was our team identity. And again, off the court, we spent some time on identifying these words. They ended up being connected, dynamic, relentless, and tough for us this season. They might be different next year. Different teams that create identities might come up with a slogan or something. That didn't end up resonating with our team. But these 4 words essentially became our style of play and the way we wanted to show up and be who we are every single day. So going back to that opening quote that I started with about it being more about who we are rather than what we do, this is who we believed who we were, along with our standards and our values. So we also built positional roles within these, and ultimately players even developed their own personal roles around some of these words. And one player's job might be just to be relentless, whereas another player's job might be to do all 4 of these things. And under each word, we've got, I think, 5 bullets that, again, the team created. A lot of this was developed after we had played some games, so they could really pull it out of the style of play and the system that we had implemented. But things really became more about these words, and as a staff, we tried to use these words every single day. When we first finalized these words, we had a challenge in practice as within our coaches of saying, okay, who can use all 4 words first? So in between a drill, we'd come together and say, I got connected in, and someone else would say, I said relentless. So it was a good challenge for us. It held us accountable, and it implemented our standards. So again, the way we built our identity is by using the language. We also implemented some scoring systems based on the items. So, one of the things here is offensive rebounds. I think that's a pretty easy one. If we're getting offensive rebounds, then that's an extra point for your team in that drill. So we tried to relate our compete value and our standard, or our compete standard, with our team identity, and could link the scoring and the wins to all of the same things. So all of it's very interconnected. Again, with the identity, showing appreciation, those little conversations and celebrating values through actions are all key pieces to building the identity of your team as well. And then the last big piece for us is really the debrief piece. And, I talked about how we start practice, that we end practice the same way. We don't just debrief our X's and O's. We'll talk about how our compete level was. How was our communication? Did our intensity go up or down? Like, we'll go back to our standards and evaluate how we did with those, as well as the X and O pieces from that day. We'll also spend time spotlighting those elements as well. And the spotlights tend to be more on the culture pieces than they do on the X and O pieces. And then our team created a tradition. This golf head cover / stuffed animal, is a valuable member of our team. Her name is Rafiki. And after every practice, so after the first practice of the year, a coach will give Rafiki to a player on the team for matching or showing one of our values throughout the practice. And then the next practice, whoever received Rafiki will give her to another player, and so on throughout the course of the year. We do that after every game and every practice. So Rafiki gets handed around the team throughout the course of the year. And again, it's just another tradition and form of spotlighting what individual players are bringing to our team beyond just the scoring or the stat things that tend to show up every single day. And then the final piece for us is always the reflection and evaluation. So specifically for us as a staff, we're going to ask ourselves the same questions we ask the players, and then reflect on things after practice. So, if we're not able to stay on time, as an example, was there something that we didn't allocate enough time for? Is there something that we're not teaching well enough and it's taking longer than we think it needs? So we're reflecting on ourselves in relation to our standards and our identity as well. And this season, we also had an evaluation tool where every week our players were rating our team culture and how they felt. So they would get a survey every Sunday. They'd answer 5 questions, and we would know how we were doing and how they were aligning with our values and our standards. And those created great conversations. They were good feedback for us as a staff of things we need to do better and try and build on moving forward. I think that is all I have.
Okay, that was awesome. Thanks for sharing all those examples. I think your culture kind of jumps off the page with that stuff. So we have a few questions, so I'll get to them here while we still have some time.
Right.
I will ask the first one. We had a couple kind of along the same realm of how do you deal with players that go against your team values or standards? So how do you enforce it, I guess, is another way it was asked.
Yeah, I was thinking about this one as I was finishing up the details on this, because I'm not a big consequences person. And part of it is from me as a player growing up, having to deal with consequences, running in particular, that I did not handle well. I was always the slowest on the court. So, the stress and anxiety associated of making a time that didn't help enforce a value with me. And for me, those types of things invoke more fear than actually driving home the value. So most things typically start with a conversation about why we're not aligning. Why is it not working? Maybe there's a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding with, the value or why we have it. So it tends to start there. We do get to points where there does need to potentially be a consequence. So it might not be playing in a game, might be pulling you out of practice. We try and do those things a little bit more. I think ultimately, if the values really, really don't align, then the team might not be a right fit. And that's certainly something that we can do at our level that not every team can do. But we try and handle it that way.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. I think that it's always a tough one to kind of delve into, but I appreciate that. What are 2 or 3 things that a coach would pick up if they came to your practice to evaluate your team and your culture? So you always hear that coaches talk about a good culture you can kind of walk into and see. What do you think coaches are going to walk in and see at your practices?
Well, I hope it's some of these things, but I think certainly like joy is one of the first things that come to mind. I think our players this season in particular really enjoy coming to practice and have fun competing and learning. So that would be a first thing. I would say just an energy overall to practice. And I think these are all interlinked, but the communication piece as well. I think our gym is a fairly noisy gym.
Yeah, so you talked about psychological safety, and we've got a few questions about that. So someone asked if you could kind of talk more about it, or the other question was, could you identify something that changed your approach that made you more conscientious of the psychological safety aspect?
Yeah, well, I think in coaching and in sport, there's naturally a high level of judgment, and you have to deal with judgment all the time, whether it's from the scoreboard in a game where you're going to be judged, or on your individual play. and certainly in practice by a coach and your teammates of your performance every possession essentially, but throughout the course of a practice. But I think, I guess the biggest shift in the psychological judgment or psychological safety side of things is what are we judging? And I think that's been the biggest shift for me, is more clearly outlining objectives for the day has narrowed what I'm judging. So if I know practice, we're working on offensive transition and ball screen D and offensive rebounding, I've got free reign to essentially judge those things because they're what we're emphasizing. And that's not to say that we don't, work on other things in a practice beyond the three things, but I've tried to be better at not, we're working on ball screen defense and then, start stopping the drill all the time because our, weak side spacing is horrendous, because that's just not helping the athlete with what the learning is. So I guess that's an example of, how it's changed my approach a little bit. And I think the athletes feel a little bit more comfortable to make a mistake. They're a little bit more comfortable to, go out there and try something. And I don't know that I'm, direct line answering the question right now, but that's kind of the process of it all.
No, I think you did a good job answering that for sure. I'm going to try to sneak in one or two more, but one is kind of, a common theme amongst the questions, coaching female athletes, and me knowing that as well. How do you handle the part where if your team doesn't want to be critical of each other, how do you get them to compete while still socially getting along? How do you bring that out but kind of keep the team dynamic?
Yeah, I think honestly, a lot of the things we did this season were designed to overcome a lot of that. So like the tracking of some of the compete things, I think it made it, going back to the safety, tracking it made it a little bit safer for those true competitors to really be themselves and go out there and win. And sometimes there's going to be a bit of a divide there, but the more you can celebrate the effort to compete, I think, and recognize the effort to compete, that will grow. I think there's always going to be some personalities that are a little bit more resistant to those types of things or less comfortable. At our level, you try and recruit the type of players that fit the way you're trying to play. But I think through emphasizing the compete and the communication and the conversations around accountability, I think those skills can be developed too.
There are so many great questions here, so it's always tough to kind of squeeze them in. So we can't get to them all, obviously, with another speaker coming up. So I would encourage you to reach out to Coach. I'm going to give you one more. Someone asked about how much voice do you give your players in practice? So how much is player-led, and then also how do you get them to lead with their voice in practice?
I think it varies how much they lead. I think I showed the example of our one-on-one ladder where, things become pretty consistent in practice and they can self-organize. This season, we had some fairly natural leaders, so we spent less time facilitating some of the leadership. But other things we've done in the past is I've gone to a player and say, okay, we're in this drill next, and it's their job to get us organized. I touched on it, assigning specific people communication jobs within a team huddle, just so it's not always the same dominant voice coming all the time. That's a big part of it too.
Nice. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. Again, Coach, really appreciate your time. I think in watching your teams compete in various settings for Canada Basketball and through Ryerson, you always see your chemistry of your teams on your bench, and anyone that watches you sees that. So thanks for sharing these ideas. This was great. I will just remind everybody that, again, we're hopeful to get these videos up soon, so stay tuned for that. Make sure you follow us on social media. Check out the offers that are listed in the chat. Coach, I'll give you the final word, and then we'll let everyone go for the evening.
Just huge thanks to everybody tuning in, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to with my contact info right there.